So this is a forum about how to advance democracy. And Internews, for those of you who haven't heard of it, it's a media development information ecosystem support organization. We operate globally in about 40 different countries. Most of them are not democracies, or certainly are no longer democracies. But the work we do is really about storytelling, it's about information, it's about community. And we are seeing so many countries where there is democratic backsliding and there are norms that are being dismantled. And it really highlights the point that democracy is partly kind of system of elections and institutions, but it's also really about people having power and agency over their lives and then having the means by which they can facilitate their needs. They can meet that, they can have their needs met and demand that their needs are met. So what I want to talk really about is information ecosystems here, because we started off as Internews as a organization that facilitated satellite bridge technology, used satellite bridge technology to have conversations between normal people across the Iron Curtain. So housewives in the United States could speak to housewives in the former GDR and ask each other fairly benign questions. What kind of washing machine do you use? Or, you know, how many meals do you cook for your family a day? Just really simple questions. And the principles behind this was that communication ultimately builds bridges, facilitates peace, and will decrease polarization. And those messages are more valid than ever. So I'm just going to start with what our theory of change is here, really. And this was something we developed over the last few years. It seems even more pertinent this year. But when we look at media, we don't just look at media, we look at healthy information ecosystems and say, what do you need for a healthy information ecosystem? And by this, I mean an ecosystem, an environment where you have, as individuals, the information you need to make informed decisions about your life. So it's relevant, trustworthy, accurate, and timely. And so you need good information. And this is an independent media, but it's also universities, it's also good government data, it's good statistics, it's good scientific data, easily, clearly collated. That information needs to be accessible, it needs to be open, it needs to be free, you need to be able to access it safely. You need to have a diversity and plurality of information providers. Now, this really matters, because I remember a statistician I was at the University of Oxford, Denise Leavesley, who always said, you know, we measure what we treasure. So what we measure as a society tells you about what value we put in society. So to give one example, there was no data collected about maternal health in prisons, because female prisoners having babies was not considered a priority in society. So we need a plurality and a diversity of information producers to basically make sure that we are not bringing our own biases into what we collect. Increasingly, you need a rights-affirming legal and regulatory environment anywhere in the world for this data to be collated, stored, distributed safely across society. You need to prioritize the safety of those who create, who produce and engage with this information. And again, we talk about press freedom, but we also talk about the archivists, the economists, the data scientists who are increasingly finding themselves under attack in all parts of the world for just trying to produce the data that they produce. Also students who are, you know, in many ways the information distributors in their communities. Also influencers, content creators, all the people who are working with their audiences and communities they really know and understand because they're part of it, are coming under huge threats around the world. And crucially, you also need engaged citizens. And these are citizens who understand the environment they're living in. And this is partly about media literacy, it's partly about digital literacy, but it's also about, again, just understanding the forces that are working around you. Why are people telling you things? In whose interests are you being given this information? Do you trust it? Should you trust it? And so I just wanted to pick up one project we do. As we said, we operate in closing civic spaces, but this is kind of, this work that we do in Central Asia is really, really interesting because it is, these are countries that have a long history of information suppression. These are citizens who are used to not being able to access good information. They are at the kind of crossroads of so many political influences, foreign influence operations. There's a huge environment for misinformation, and yet It is also one of the most dynamic, brilliantly hopeful communities I've ever really encountered. We have a huge space there for digital producers who are young, they're digital first, they're local language driven, and this is really interesting because while their parents might be consuming media, which is often television in Russian, because that's what the state-sponsored television tends to be in, they are reviving Uzbek, Tajik, Kazakh as languages to speak amongst themselves, but to do their journalism in. And it's kind of way of creating identity and also creating trust and differentiating yourself from the kind of huge slew of information out there in English and in Russian that people don't feel is relevant to them. It's rooted in tradition, and they're really keen to tell their stories. So we have this project, a series of projects actually, funded by the European Union, by the FCDO, various organizations, but they really kind of, they draw on tradition and take out the digital work as well. And this is my favorite one. I just want to tell you the story of the Akins, who are the wandering minstrels of Central Asia, and they still look like that. They kind of travel and they tell stories. It was a dying art that was, again, kind of not supported by consequent governments, but deeply loved and had always survived. And what we did with our projects really kind of pulled them into our kind of real world and online storytelling. So we worked with them, made sure that there were still places where there are concert venues where they can gather and tell their stories in traditional way, but also for the ones who are interested, put them on Instagram, showed them how to upload videos, how to use their music, distribute their music. And all the trainers that we used are also from that community and had grown up listening to these songs, understood and loved this music deeply. And it was kind of, it had miraculous effects. It meant that they then went around during the pandemic, they could go around and speak about what was happening in this rightly scary world around them. They were trusted, they could give information about vaccines, about health, they could give information about what was happening in the rest of the world to communities that were often not online, but would listen to these people, and then their children who would be online would kind of be able to disseminate this work. The other people we worked with were documentary storytellers. And so this is Dina. And Dina is an Uzbek woman who ended up living in Kazakhstan, just outside Almaty. And because of the kind of waves of government and change she and her family had lived through, she was basically stateless. All her papers were invalid. She was living in a summer house, which sounds idyllic till you remember that temperatures in Kazakhstan get to minus 30 degrees Celsius in the winter, and which is when I was there, and you don't want to be there. But again, a kind of local filmmakers found her, told her story, and this had a huge impact both on her. It got the Uzbek authorities' attention. They managed to sort out the paperwork and get her papers, get her children into school, but it also resonated with large migrant populations across both Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan who'd found themselves like this. So finding a community that literally had no voice, no papers, no place to be, and pulling them in and saying, we can find a way to kind of make you actual citizens who then can participate in the political process along with everybody else was really fundamental. And this was done by local filmmakers just coming through. And what we did with them was say, okay, we can help you make the documentary, but then what? How do you get it in front of the authorities? How do you change the paperwork for this one individual? And then how do you kind of get other people involved as well? The other part of what we do increasingly is look at how climate is affecting communities, how it's affecting journalism, how it's affecting information ecosystems. And again, what we see here is a huge digital divide and a generational divide. Young people experience climate change completely differently. A lot of their kind of sense of impending doom over the future is related to climate change, and they are in very many ways dealing with the consequences of their actions, of their parents and grandparents, and will continue to do so. This is Ulangan Olka. This was kind of nuclear testing site. I don't know whether you remember in the Soviet era that had completely poisoned the land, had a devastating impact on the families that grew up there. They were only now beginning to understand the kind of full medical and health repercussions. What we did here was work again with local journalists who wanted to report on the phenomena because they felt that the young people who are still being affected by what happened to their families and their parents and grandparents here, and they felt powerless. They felt like, we grew up, we have all these medical issues, we have no right to compensation, what do we do? And so through a whole series of stories published on these websites, what we managed to do was draw in a community of people who are directly affected and then help them, you know, get the papers that they needed in order to claim compensation, in order to get the various protections and support that had been offered somewhere down the line, but in a very bureaucratic way that made it impossible for most people to actually access. So this was both about storytelling, but it was also about saying that we are able to tell the story and affect real change. And so I just want to that's really it. What we do across Internews is make connections. So we bringing people together, we're trying to create global communities, knowledge sharing communities, where the knowledge sharing is going in all directions, so that people are telling stories of themselves to bring themselves back to life. Thank you.